Hi everybody, we are making yeast spreads this week, so we're going to do pizza dough. So the first thing we need to talk about is our leavening agents. So in our quick breads unit, we used chemical leavening agents, which are baking soda and baking powder. Yeast spreads uses a natural leavening agent, which is yeast. Now, yeast is a little different than baking soda and baking powder. It needs some things to help it come back to life. So we mix yeast with warm water and with sugar. Now you mix this together and you're gonna let it sit for about 5 to 10 minutes until it gets foamy. You guys will see that happen here in a moment. While that is getting ready, we're gonna talk about yeast a little bit more in depth. So this is what yeast looks like when you buy it in the store. Sometimes it comes in these little packets, sometimes it comes in a can. It may be kind of hard to find right now if you're looking for it. There's a couple different kinds. You can get active dry yeast and instant yeast. You can buy either one. Instant yeast means you don't have to do this step where you let it sit in the warm water. Active dry yeast, it's been dried, so it has to come back to life. So the warm water helps activate it, and the sugar gives it something to eat. Okay, so you have to have both of those things in order for it to work right in your bread dough. The other ingredients that we have for our pizza dough is flour, a little bit of olive oil, and salt. Now flour is our structure of our dough, and salt has a specific role in yeast spreads. It's going to slow down the process that the yeast is doing to make your dough rise. So this is going to help control the yeast and make sure your dough doesn't get too big. That being said, you never want to add this into the water with the yeast. You want to let it activate before you add your salt. Okay, so we're going to add our salt into our flour mix over here. About a teaspoon and a half, maybe. Now, another difference between quick breads and yeast spreads is that in quick breads, your amount of flour that you use is exact. So when you make muffins, it's 2 cups of flour, or it's 1.5 cups of flour, and you can't use more or less than that. When you're making yeast spreads, it's an approximate amount of flour. So it's 3 to 4 cups of flour. You always start with less flour because you can always add more in. That has to do with a lot of things. It can have to do with the type of flour you have. So this is just the grocery store brand. The age of your flour is going to affect how much it absorbs your liquid. The humidity in the air will affect it also. So always start with less flour when you're making your yeast spreads. So if you zoom back in on our yeast, you can see it's kind of getting foamy and thick in there. Now you could let this sit for a couple more minutes and it will get really foamy, but we're going to use it right now. As long as it's dissolved, you're good to go. So we're going to dump our yeast and water mixture in here. We're going to also add a little olive oil. Olive oil is a type of fat, so it's going to help tenderize your dough and make it nice and soft and pliable. All right, here's where you're going to start to add your flour in. So, let's find our measuring cup. I would just add in about a cup at a time. You're going to use a wooden spoon to mix it in. So once your flour mixes in with your water like this, obviously at this point you need more flour, so add some more. Okay, once your dough starts to come together like a shaggy dough like this, you're gonna dump it out onto the counter and you're gonna knead it with your hands. So you no longer need to use your wooden spoon. So you are going to take a little bit of your flour and you're gonna dust your surface with it. You'll dump your pizza dough out. Now, kneading your pizza dough is gonna help develop gluten, which is that chewy texture of your bread, which is what you want in bread. Whereas in your quick breads unit and muffins and pancakes, you don't want them chewy, so we mix them as little as possible. This you wanna mix a lot because you want it chewy. So you're gonna take your flour, and as you knead, you're just gonna keep on adding flour. You don't want it to get dry, so don't add too much at a time, but while you're kneading, you're gonna lift up your dough, and then you're gonna gently press with your palms. And then you'll turn your dough, lift it and fold, and gently press. Turn, lift and fold, and gently press. It's okay if your dough is a little sticky. I rather have a little bit of a sticky dough than a tough dough. You're just gonna keep doing this for like 5 to 10 minutes. It's a lot longer than you would think. As it absorbs the flour, you're gonna wanna add a little bit more. But remember, you don't have to use all of the flour that you measured out. So you're just gonna keep doing this for about 5 to 10 minutes until it's a really nice, soft, smooth ball of dough. There is a test that you can do with your dough to see if you've kneaded it long enough, and it's called the window pane test. It's where you take a piece of your dough, okay? It's not gonna work right now because it's not ready, but you'll pull it apart in your fingers like this, and if you can get it thin enough to look through it without breaking like that into little holes, then it's ready, okay? Obviously, I've only been kneading for a minute or two, so you can see the holes were made. Once you are done kneading your dough, you're gonna grease a bowl, which means just take a bowl like this once you've cleaned it, and you'll just drizzle a little bit of oil in and kind of just make sure all the edges and sides and bottom of the bowl are covered in oil, and you'll lay your dough in there, and then you're gonna cover it with a kitchen towel, and you're gonna let it rise for about an hour and a half. So again, there's another difference between your quick bread and your yeast bread. Quick breads can go right into the oven and they rise in the oven, whereas yeast breads need some time. Just like the water that helped activated the yeast, it needed to be warm. So you want to place the bowl while it's rising somewhere that's warm. All right, that's all there is to it. I'm gonna finish kneading my dough. I hope you guys can find some yeast in the grocery stores and give it a try. Hey guys, we're back with our pizza dough. This is what it looks like after a couple of hours rising. Remember, in a warm place, you usually want to put a towel over it so that like flies can't get to it and it stays moist underneath. So what you're gonna do after this part is dump this out on your counter. You might want to put a little flour down and dump it out. Okay, it's gonna start to kind of deflate. Now with yeast breads, after you let it rise, there's a step called punching it down, which doesn't actually mean punching it. It just means kind of getting all of those air bubbles out and flattening kind of out. And you can kind of fold it up on itself like this. The key to remember about this stage is don't play with it too much. The more you play with it, the more it's gonna get tough and it's not gonna roll out really nicely for you. So I'm gonna cut this up into a couple different pieces. I like to have smaller pizzas rather than one big one, but you could cut it in half and do 2 big pizzas. So there's a couple ways you can roll this out for pizza dough. I suggest just using your hands. You don't need a rolling pin. Just make sure your surface is floured like this and put your pizza dough down. Now the key, don't play with it too much. So once you start stretching it out, you don't want to ball it back up because you don't like the shape. It doesn't have to be a perfect circle. Mine are never perfect circles. So the first step I suggest doing is just pushing out with your fingers like this, okay? My helper Charlie over here is also going to be shaping a pizza dough.
Hope I don't mess this up.
Okay, so just pushing out with your fingers. You never want to push on the edges because this is where your crust is going to be. So if you push really hard on your edges, they're going to kind of thin out like that, and you don't want that. So kind of stay in the middle of your dough like this and just kind of go in a circle. Every now and again, you want to kind of lift it up and make sure it's not sticking to your counter. You might need a little more flour. And you just push out like this. Now you can keep doing this until you get to the size that you want, or you can start to use your hands and pick up your dough. So if you hold your dough up like this, gravity is gonna weigh your dough down and stretch it for you. So if you just kind of turn the dough in your hands like this, that will help it get bigger. Okay?
She makes it look very easy.
So now we're starting to get a little bit bigger. From here, something else you can do is put it on top of your hands. This is kind of the traditional pizza maker way. Notice I have my knuckles like this, okay? It's not my hand going like this with my fingertips. My knuckles are curled in, and you just kind of pull apart the dough with your knuckles, okay? Okay, so if you're brave enough, you can try throwing it up in the air. So you just have it on your knuckles and you kind of toss it up and it will land back on your hands like this. There's Rocco,
Hey.
not getting enough attention back here. So just keep playing with it until it gets the size you want. Now, if you remember, we cut it into 4 pieces, so this isn't gonna make a huge pizza. So it's okay if it's a personalized size pizza. That's kind of how I like mine. Once it gets to this point, you would wanna get a baking pan, okay? Put a little olive oil down on there. You can use cooking spray. I just don't have any cooking spray right now. Just kind of smear it all over your pan. Okay? And then you can transfer your dough onto your pan. Now once it's on your pan, it's a little easier to make it even more thin. Personally, I like really thin pizza, so I like to go pretty thin. Okay, that looks about good for me, okay? Charlie's is getting pretty good. It's not gonna be perfect. I've done this many times.
Gina's
so
is perfect.
That's perfect, the way it is, okay? Then you would bring your pizza on over, and you can put anything on you want. So we have some sauce. For a pizza like this, you would pick up your sauce and plop it on there, and then you'd use the back of your spoon to smooth it out, okay? And then you'd put your cheese on, your vegetables, whatever you want. We're grilling our pizzas, so we're not gonna do that quite yet. But for your sake, you would put your toppings on. You'd put your oven on about 500 degrees, really, really hot, and then cook your pizza for like 15 to 20 minutes. And that's it, okay? Good luck.
Bye.